Everyone having a good time so far? Good conference? Yeah. I like conferences. I like how many just really smart people we can get together in one room. And that's actually what I want to talk to you about. See, I have a business proposition that I'd like to start, for a business I'd like to start. And I'd like to get you to help me with it. I'd like you to help invest in it. The basic idea is we're going to develop some little system utility, like weather reporting or stock ticker or something like that, that users can install on their computers and runs in the system tray, provides useful information. But in the background, it's also going to monitor their browsing and act as a keylogger and send that information back to us that we can then sell to advertisers. This sounds like a great business idea, right? Right? No one's interested in doing this one with me? Oh. Okay, well, I've got another business idea then. You might like this one better. I'm from the United States, so this probably wouldn't work as well here, but in the US this totally would work. We're going to get together a number of investors and buy a pharmaceutical company. There's all those small ones that we can buy up that have only one or two products. But those products are life-saving drugs. So we buy the company, we then have a monopoly on that life-saving drug, and we can jack up the price 500 or 600 times and make a fortune. Who's in? The Americans in the audience will probably recognize that one a bit better, but okay. So you don't like that idea either. All right, I got one more business plan for you. We're going to start a mining company. We still need mining. It's still an important business. It's a lot of material we have to dig out of the ground, but it is expensive. So what we're going to do different is we're going to employ as miners children. We can especially get children from poor families because they'll be able to see more advantage to having their kids come work for us. And we can have the kids work in the mines. Because, see, kids are small, and so we can have smaller mine shafts. And this will save us, we figure, 35% on our labor costs and our construction costs, and help us undercut the competition. No one, huh?
Kids get it too easy.
So aside from those two jokers, none of the rest of you like this idea? What, you have a problem with sending children to work in coal mines? But that's my whole business model. You have something against my business model?
Everything's from a business value.
I'm hoping that you have something wrong with my business model.
It's been tried, it didn't work.
It actually works surprisingly well for the people who own the mine. I'm hoping you're all saying, no, this is not okay, because sending young children to work in mines where they're going to get black lung disease is immoral. I really hope you're going to agree on that. And the fact that there's a profitable business model here is entirely irrelevant, because it should be irrelevant. If you take one thing away from this talk, please take this. If your business model requires doing something unethical, you don't have a business model. Let me say that again. If your business model requires doing something unethical, you don't have a business model. I want you to keep this in mind for the next hour. That said, I'm not actually here to talk about business models. I'm here to talk about free software. Free software as an ethical framework. Free software as a philosophy. Now, to do that, we need to start with some ancient history. By ancient, I of course mean the 70s. There's a lot of material here I'm going to gloss over. This is just a very compressed history here. But early 70s or so, this is what computers looked like. This is, I believe, a PDP-11. So early 70s. Anyone remember one of these machines? Oh, more than I expected. Okay. At this point in time, in the early 70s, software is not portable. Software is written for one computer and one computer only, because different computers are not, in fact, compatible with each other. And frankly, software is not valuable to begin with, because the hardware can cost $10 million. So the $10,000 or pounds you spend writing software is a rounding error in your budget. And it's not really portable, so it doesn't have much use commercially. So really, the only way that code can be useful is by sharing it, is by saying, all right, I have a piece of a program here, I'm going to let you use it so you can write another program with that piece of program. Because on its own, it doesn't really have any other commercial value. Also, at this point, most computers were owned by academia or scientists, or usually both. And that sharing culture was just part of academia, part of science. Science works by sharing information. Academia works by collaboration. That is just part of the culture ingrained into it, and this is a good thing. But that's just how the world worked. Getting to the mid to late 70s, we start getting this darling of the tech world growing up, Unix, which was an actually portable operating system that ran on multiple different types of computer. What a concept. And at the same time, the market was getting larger. There were more and more places that had computers, including now more private businesses. You had more companies writing custom software for those organizations. And so there was starting to be a commercial value to software for the first time. Of course, Unix had been written by Bell Labs, which was a division of AT&T, which in the United States was a government-regulated monopoly, and so they were legally not allowed to sell software. But they could license it. Nice loophole. So they licensed copies of Unix to other organizations, the universities, the companies, but they couldn't really lock down what those companies did with it. They had to provide source code because it didn't work otherwise. They had to recompile it for every system. But this meant a lot of those Unix users started developing patches to the source code, which they would then share with each other. They wouldn't distribute the whole system, they would just share their patches back and forth. This led to a lot of different incompatible variants of Unix, all running different organizations, different variations that were AT&T Unix plus some stuff patched onto the source code. The most famous of these you probably heard of was called BSD, for Berkeley Software Distribution. This is one of the most popular. It also had a lot of application software written on top of the operating system, but BSD came from Berkeley University in California, who as a public university also was not allowed to sell software. But being academics, they just gave it away. They made it available under a license that said, basically, here's the code, have fun, peace out. Because academia. But the net result was that you ended up with this complete and total mess of incompatible Unixes. Don't bother trying to read this chart, you're not going to, that's not the point. The chart is just to show how complicated the thing is. In the early 80s, though, some of these variants started to become commercial. Companies would sell AT&T Unix with their patches, and they'd sell licenses to it that were very restrictive. Then in, I believe it was '84, AT&T got broken up by the US government, and because they weren't a monopoly anymore, they could now go into the software business. And so they very quickly started closing up the source code for Unix and said, hey, we're going to now sell copies of this and you're not allowed to even make variants of it. And this made people very upset. At the same time, a lot of these companies that were busy distributing Unix variants, including AT&T, started taking that application code written by groups like BSD at Berkeley and slapping that into their system and selling it without the source code. You started having the ability to ship just binaries and not source code, and they were doing that. So you had a whole bunch of code written by academics at universities that you could download for free, compile, stick onto a 8-inch floppy, and then sell to somebody, and you didn't have to give them any of that source code. You could just give them the binary and say, hey, all you can do is run this. And so companies did. Lots of them. As you can imagine, this made a lot of people rather cross. One of the people that made rather upset was a man named Richard Stallman. Stallman, at the time, worked at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, and he had grown up in those sharing days when sharing source code with each other was just what you did because, well, what other option is there? And he got to watch as the computers that he was using in the lab got replaced with newer models that now came with software which had a license on it that said, you can run this, but don't you dare touch the source code and don't you share it with anyone, because selling individual copies of software as if they were physical hardware is our business model. Now, I need to pause here, make a brief aside. Stallman is a philosopher, and like many philosophers throughout history, that doesn't necessarily mean he's a great human being. You've probably heard a lot of the negative stories about him. Most of them are true. I've had dinner with him twice. Yes, they're true. That's not the point. So I'm just going to ask you to put that aside for now and ignore the fact that if you look up smelly, neck-bearded, socially inept computer nerd in the dictionary, you will in fact find Stallman's picture. Just put that aside. We're not talking about that today. However, Stallman decided to do something about it because he's stubborn. Now, as the legend goes, he ran into a problem where he needed to fix his printer driver, and the company wouldn't let him because they wouldn't provide the source code, and they wouldn't let him contribute source code back. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's not the point. Printer drivers are not the point. What's the point here? The point is personal freedom. How does personal freedom enter into this? Because computers are tools. That's all they are. All of these computers we have sitting around here, all of these computers in our laptops and our laptop bags, these are tools. And tools should obey their owner, not the other way around. The tool should do what you tell it to do. You should not be doing what the tool tells you to do. Who here has kids? A little more than half the room, I think. Okay? We teach our kids to share. We try to teach our kids, hey, you can share your toys with others. It's okay. Take turns, share with your toys with others, be nice, help out your friend. And then we turn around and say, but here we have this really cool toy that you can give your friend and still have yourself, and so you can both use it, and you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to share your toys. What? How does that make any sense at all? But with this new model of software, it's meant that the first step in using a computer was to promise to not help your neighbor. That's ethically problematic, let's be honest. Why is this a problem? Because computer users should be free to modify their programs to fit their needs and free to share the software with their neighbors, with their friends. Because helping people is the basis of society. Helping other people is the basis of society. If you are not allowed to help your neighbor, you are not in a society. That's the whole point of being in a society with other people. The software is incidental. This is about your freedom to act in your own self-interest, your freedom to help others, the freedom to help your neighbor. This is about your personal sovereignty over your digital life, controlling your own digital destiny. You have a right to control your own digital life, just as much as you do your own offline life. So Stallman said, you know what? Software should support this ethical vision. It should support personal freedom and personal sovereignty. So he started a project called GNU, which stands for GNU's Not Unix, and was an attempt to completely write a clean room, re-implement a Unix-like operating system. GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix. The G stands for GNU. It's a recursive acronym because Stallman's a nerd. Of course, I'm at a PHP conference, so I can't really talk about that too much. In 1985, he founded the Free Software Foundation as an organization to support this effort. It's a nonprofit. You can donate money to it that funds development. But of course, the question was, okay, we're going to be writing this software. What license do we use for it? At the time, we mentioned the BSD license before. The most popular application software at the time, on top of Unix, was something called X Windows. X Windows is the graphical system on pretty much any Unix system. It's evolved a lot since then, but X was under a license called the MIT license, which was basically the exact same thing as the BSD license. Here's the code, have fun, whatever. And at the time, because the license was so liberal, a lot of organizations had taken the X source code, made a slight tweak to it to fork it, locked it up, sold it as a proprietary copy, and that was totally legal. There was no requirements to reciprocate. They got all of this code and all of this work for free, and they gave nothing back. More importantly, they didn't give anything forward. They had all this freedom to modify the code, but their customers didn't. That's the problem. At least that's what Solomon saw as a problem. For the X developers, their goal was not freedom, just success, defined as having lots of users. Whether those users had any freedom over their own computers and their own lives was irrelevant, only that there's a lot of them. The statement behind a permissive license is, I would rather have lots of people using my code than those people have any rights. Stallman's not okay with this. Need a way to ensure that users of the code are not able to take away someone else's rights. We need software that is truly free. What does it mean to be free? Stallman defined it this way. Freedom 0, because nerd. The freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. The freedom to study how the program works and change it so it does your computing as you wish. The freedom to redistribute copies so you can help your neighbor. And the freedom to distribute copies of your modified version. This is a somewhat clumsy way of wording it. Mostly it's based on the way Unix was distributed in the early 80s. I like to restate it as the freedom to use, learn, improve, and share. Improve can also mean just modify to fit my use case. That means it's improved for you, not necessarily for someone else, but that's okay. They can modify it a different way. This is what we mean by free. Because this gives you ultimate control over what your tool is doing. And Stallman put together something called the GNU General Public License. Yes, the G in GPL stands for general, not GNU. Which says essentially, you have all 4 of those freedoms on condition that when you distribute the source code, you extend those same freedoms to your users. Only on distribution does this even matter. If you don't distribute the code, there's no restriction on you at all. If you distribute the code, you have to pay it forward. You have to give your users the same freedom you have. This got termed copyleft as a pun on copyright, because nerd. And Stallman and others started writing an operating system. And it took several years, during which time they were mostly funded by people buying copies of their software, oftentimes for over $100 a pop. But they got a copy of the source code with it and the right to do whatever they wanted with it as long as they respected their downstream users. And this funded development for years. Along about 1991, they had pretty much everything they needed except the actual kernel. Because, let's face it, kernels are hard. So they sat down and said, all right, let's start working on a Unix-like kernel. And then some Finnish kid came along and said, hey, I just put together a Unix-like kernel for IBM PCs. Think it's cool? It actually was not free software initially. The first version in 91 was not under the GPL. The second version in 1992 was released under the GPL. And a lot of people looked at this and said, hey, this is really cool. If only we had all the other software to put on top of it to make an operating system. Hey, look, here's this pile of code that the Free Software Foundation has been writing for years. Let's put that on top, and now we have a Linux operating system. And the people who've been working on everything but the kernel for years, and mostly have lost that fight. But that's why that fight exists. And, okay, people started using this system, and throughout the 90s, this evolved, and the ecosystem started developing around it of developers, system integrators, consultants, training, system, and so on. And out of this development, you also started seeing the birth of the internet around this time. And the combination of really easy communication and code where the source code had to be available led to a really interesting collaborative development model where just everyone worked on the code together and no one actually charged each other for it, but now the code is better and everyone just used it. And over time, people realized that this is a really cool development model. We should try to encourage its use. Okay? But there's one problem. This free word scares people. People don't like free. People don't want to talk about freedom. But we want them to use this development model. I know, let's rename it. And so a couple of prominent figures in this ecosystem got together and said, you know what? We're just going to rename this thing to make it more palatable to guys in suits. And yes, it was guys in suits at that point. Because the term free makes a lot of corporate types nervous. I don't really care, that's their problem, but that's open source, is a development model that grew out of free software as a result. And a lot of the advocates of open source argued that we should just ignore all this politics and free stuff. We don't care about rights. The editor of Linux magazine commented that the move to open source software should be fueled by technical rather than political decisions. Oh, this stuff about user freedom and civil rights, that's just political stuff. We don't care about that. Caldera, which was at the time one of the large Linux distributors, their CEO argued that we should just drop this freedom goal and work instead just for the popularity of Linux. It doesn't matter that users have freedom, just that they are numerous. Because they are nervous about their business model. Not about their users' freedom, just their business model. And if it's just about popularity, it means adding some proprietary stuff back in is okay, and we can use that as a hook to make sure we make money. In the last year or two, there have been a lot of articles published about how, oh, open source is 20 years old. What's the impact of that? No, it's 34 years old. People have been at this for a lot longer based on freedom, not based on technical factors. Fundamentally, open source is a development methodology. Free software is a social movement. They often overlap. They usually overlap. They are not the same thing. In fact, if you could prove that free software always produced an inferior technical product, that would not matter in the slightest. Because that's not the point of free software. Technical superiority is irrelevant to free software. Superior protection of user rights is what matters. Even if you could prove that forcing children to work in a mine was economically more efficient, it would still be wrong. In fact, despite the marketing, open source is not always technically superior. Who's heard of Linus's law? Decent number of people, yeah? Given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. This is one of the arguments for why open source code is better than closed source code, because you'll find more bugs when more people can see it. It's not actually true. It's been studied. It's not true. The rate of bugs is about the same for open source and closed source code. What's different is the rate of malicious code. It is extremely hard to get malicious code into a free software project. What do I mean by malicious? I mean companies that want to spy on their own users. Like, say, build a rootkit into their software. So you install the software, guess what? Your system's now rooted and the company can access your computer. Sony. Or a cell phone that tracks your location even after you've turned off the track my location checkbox. Google. Or an ebook reader that lets the company reach into it and delete files off of it that you have already paid for. Yes, Amazon did that. Guess what book it was? 1984. And this is just the company itself. Any kind of hostile attacker that wants to capture data can do this, whether it's the original company or not. Government intelligence agencies, all of them want to do this. All of them are doing this. Came out a couple of years ago, Microsoft showed Windows bugs to the NSA before they got fixed, so that the American government had access to security holes in your computers before you knew about it. Fundamentally, free software is about protecting users from developers, from us. We as software developers have shown we cannot be trusted. We as an industry have failed to protect our users from us. Your freedom as a developer is not the point we're talking about. I often hear people talk about, oh, MIT and BSD and permissive licenses like that, they are more free than the GPL because they restrict me less. That's not the point. The point is protecting your users from you, because you as a developer cannot be trusted. This has been proven. The only freedom that a BSD license or MIT license gives you as a developer, that the GPL doesn't, is the freedom to take away the freedom of your users. Is that really something you want to defend? Fundamentally, if the user does not control the program controls the users. And who controls the program if it's not the user? Us. Software that we write is a way for us to control other people, whether they want us to or not. Put another way, from Cory Doctorow, the former director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, when a computer receives conflicting instructions from its owner and from a remote party, the owner must win. He said this in 2016, but this is the same concept that goes all the way back to the dawn of free software 34 years ago. People have a right to digital self-sovereignty. People have a right to control their own lives. And software, proprietary software, takes that away. Free software is civil rights applied to the software industry. It's the exact same concept. Now, well, Larry, all this talk about freedom and philosophy and ethics and so on, is any of this a real problem? Glad you asked. Now, most of these examples are kind of US-centric because that's where I'm from and that's where I found these, but it took me about 30 seconds to find some non-US examples as well. This is Walden Odell. He's a businessman in the US state of Ohio. And in 2003, at a fundraiser, declared, "I am committed to helping Ohio deliver its electoral votes to the president next year." That is, at the time, re-electing President George W. Bush in 2004. And fine, political free speech, he has every right to support the candidate he wants. I have no objection to that at all. The catch is, he's was at the time the CEO of Diebold, which was a company that made electronic voting machines that were going to be used all across the country, including in Ohio. Ohio, where when the 2004 election came around, there were a lot of problems with those machines, with them not working or recording information wrong, and you push the button for John Kerry and the checkbox next to George W. Bush would light up instead. Unfortunately, the code is proprietary. So was it just buggy? Was it overblown? Or did the company actually hack the voting machines themselves to throw the election? It was a very close election. I don't know. The source code is proprietary. I can't tell you. Now, I am not saying, I don't want anyone to go home and say that Larry said that the Ohio election in 2004 in the United States was stolen. I am not saying that. I'm also not saying it wasn't. Nobody can actually say if that election was fair or not. The people of Ohio are legally not allowed to know if their election was fair. That is wrong. This is Sarah Goldman, prominent PHP developer, internals developer, really nice woman. A lot of you have met her. She also gave me permission to talk about her here, so it's okay. Sarah is also diabetic. For those not familiar with diabetes, super condensed version, you need to keep a certain level of blood sugar, in your blood. If it goes too high, you die. If it goes too low, you die. Normally, your pancreas produces a chemical called insulin that regulates your level of blood sugar so that it keeps it in a safe zone. If your pancreas isn't working right for some reason, then it's not producing insulin, and you need to take additional insulin to supplement it and manually monitor your insulin levels and your blood sugar level and inject yourself with insulin. And that's diabetes. And like a lot of diabetics, Sarah uses an insulin pump, which is a little computer that you wear on your belt or in your pocket that's connected to a syringe that's built into your body. And then at regular intervals, it checks your blood sugar level and injects you with extra insulin. Or there's a button you can push to give you an extra jolt of insulin to help regulate your blood sugar level. Problem. This is a computer plugged into your body capable of spilling a chemical into it that could kill you if it gets it wrong. What's the software running on it? I don't know. She doesn't know. She is legally not allowed to look at the software running on the device plugged into her body that could kill her. By the way, it also accepts over-the-air updates. Is it secure? It's proprietary. I have no idea. She doesn't know if the device she's using to keep her alive has a kill switch that can assassinate her at a distance. Think that some government wouldn't want to do that? This is wrong. This is a John Deere tractor. Actually, I lied. This is a computer with wheels. Because let's face it, these days, all vehicles are computers with wheels. Most of what's going on in here is electronic at this point. And farmers in any country use these by the hundreds and by the thousands to harvest their crop. And they have to do it very quickly because for most major crops these days, they have a short window in which to harvest them in order to get maximum yield. And at the end of the day, I bought this equipment. I want everything I need to keep it running without relying on the manufacturer or dealer. Seems reasonable, right? You know, it's your tractor. The farmer owns this tractor. They want to be able to keep it working. And if a part breaks, they want to replace it and get back to work harvesting food. Problem. Those parts are all electronic, and John Deere has put digital restrictions management software on them so that you cannot, in fact, replace parts yourself. You have to go back to them and have one of their authorized dealers come out to install a new part whenever they get there. And they could get there a week later. You can buy the part third party, but you can't approve it and authorize it without them coming in and giving it the magic key to approve it and say it's blessed by John Deere. By the way, those cost more. By the way, those take longer to get there. Service manuals are available, but those aren't actually useful without the magic key to bless this new piece of hardware. Farmers are not allowed to fix their own computers, to fix their own tractors, fix their own farm equipment so that they can do their jobs without permission from a company on high. This is wrong. This is Eric Loomis. In 2013, in the US state of Wisconsin, he was arrested for car theft and found guilty, he was, and sentenced to jail. Problem was, his sentence was determined not by a judge, but by a judge using a tool called Compass, which you plug in various information about someone, and it recommends how long they should be in jail for based on, I don't know, some algorithm. And he sued, saying that his civil rights were violated by the use of this software because it's proprietary. He can't challenge it, and he has a right as a citizen to face his accuser, but he couldn't challenge it because his accuser was a proprietary program. And the courts ruled against him. So he's in jail because a program said so. Problem. a lot of jurisdictions are now using software like this to determine parole, to determine sentencing. And it's a funny thing. The software keeps giving longer sentences to people from ethnic minorities. Does it have a good reason for that? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Another study found that in terms of the software predicting whether or not someone will reoffend, it was no better than a human was. This is in the US. It took me about a minute and a half of Googling a couple of days ago to find examples from the Durham Constabulary here in the UK, doing the exact same thing. And it seems to always be biased against poor people. It seems to always recommend harsher sentences for poor people. Does it have a good reason for that? I don't know. You don't know. No one knows. There are people in jail today, in 2019, because a piece of software they are not allowed to look at, not allowed to study, not allowed to challenge, said so. This is wrong. When we talk about proprietary software being a tool of oppression, that's not a euphemism. I mean that in a very literal and visceral way. Now, a lot of people at this point will say, oh, this is why we should not have government and laws and regulation. That's not even an option. We don't have a choice between regulation and no regulation, because the code regulates. It implements values or not. It enables freedoms or disables them. It protects privacy or promotes monitoring. People choose how the code does these things. People write the code. We write the code. The people in this room. Code is a form of law. It regulates behavior. We are writing law. Non-free law that is not accessible to people is secret law. Secret law is what totalitarian governments use. Now, of course, someone's probably going to say, but Larry, I work on the web. I'm just building websites. How does this matter to me? I don't write prison software. How does this matter to people working on the web? How about the world's largest user of PHP? Asterisk. Technically, they use Hack now with PHP fork, but they were built on PHP for the first decade or so. I could write an entire talk, probably an entire conference, just on the ways in which Facebook has used PHP code to violate the rights of its users. Not even in debatable ways. Up to and including, oh, the software has been used to help incite genocide. Because of who knows what algorithm they're using to recommend articles that happen to be fake and designed to encourage genocide. Every link here is from 2018. I'm not even talking about anything from 2016 and Cambridge Analytica and all of that kind of mess, which happened both here and in the US. This is just 2018. This is exactly the sort of social ill that free software was intended to defend against. If we could at least see the source code and what that algorithm is, we could at least tell what they're doing. Right now, we don't even know. We have to assume the worst. We've been talking about this for 3.5 decades, for longer than some people in this room have been alive. And we are just now starting to wake up to the threat this poses. So with tech talk, there is, of course, always an XKCD that is relevant. Give it a rest. Maybe we just want to live our lives where get software that works, not get wrapped up in nerd turf wars and all this freedom philosophy and stuff. Oh God, they're doing evil things with our data. You think? Now, part of the problem here is the ASP loophole, by which I mean application service provider, not active server pages, so .NET people don't get angry, at least not for that. The ASP loophole basically takes advantage of the fact that if you only let people run software over a network, they never actually get a copy of the code, so the distribution parts of the GPL don't apply. So they don't have any rights now. Yay! This applies to everything on the web. The web was built on free software. 90% of what you are doing on the web is free software all the way down to the hardware. And yet, the web threatens the basis of free software. Okay. So in 2002, when web-based stuff was just starting to appear, a group called Affero Consulting, and I believe it was the Netherlands, contacted the FSF and said, hey, we want to write free software that actually respects our users. And so FSF and Affero collaborated on what became known as the Affero GPL, which says essentially it's the GPL asterisk, but using the software over a network counts as distribution. So anyone using an application over the web, they are entitled to a copy of the source code as well, just as much as if you had given them a copy of the code in the first place, so that they know what the code is doing. They know what you are doing to them with your code. This addresses some of the issues with hosted applications, but not all. This addresses the question of what's the code doing, but not what are you doing with my data. Because data is just as important as code now, if not more so. When the GPL was written, the idea of data of value being up on a server didn't exist. Now, data of value up on a server is everywhere. The AGPL only solves part of this. I'm sure you're all by now familiar with the GDPR. If you're not, you really need to get familiar with it very quickly. The GDPR says essentially, users own their data, not the company. This is good. They may have some issues with implementation in places, but this is definitely a step in the right direction. So does this matter to anyone here? Are you concerned about data usage, about your customers' data usage? Hey Alexa, how much data are you stealing from my users? Hey Alexa, you send people's recordings to the wrong user. Hey Alexa, how much data are you tracking that you're not telling us about? Hey Alexa, I just wrote an Amazon skill for my company that is now feeding my customers' data to Amazon. Are you okay with that? Who's built a login form to let users log in with Facebook to their web app? Which therefore means you are giving Facebook information on your users. Facebook tracks everyone, even people like me who don't have Facebook accounts. Facebook has a profile on. Every like button you put lets Facebook track your users more effectively. Why does that matter? Cambridge Analytica, anyone? No. We have an obligation to say no to this. GPL web software essentially gives users no rights to control their own use or their own data. Even the AGPL still gives users no rights to control the data, just the code. Licensing alone will not protect us, will not protect our users. We have to look at other options. Along the same basis, along the same ethical grounds that free software is founded on, as a user, you have the right to your own personal sovereignty. You have the right to your own digital destiny. You have the right to control your own digital life. What right do you as a user have to your own data? What right do your users have to their data? Are you asking these questions? Are you asking these questions of your legal department, of your CEO, of your CTO? You have an ethical obligation as an ethical human being to be asking these questions. Because data, just as much as code, is a tool of control. And we have an ethical obligation to not allow our work to be used as a tool of control. What is free software? Helping other people is the basis of society. When a computer receives conflicting instructions from its owner and from a remote party, the owner always wins. If the users don't control the program controls the users. People write the code. We write the code. We have an ethical obligation to not enable abusive control. We can ultimately build cyberspace to protect values we believe are fundamental, or we can build it to allow those values to disappear. There is no middle ground. There is no choice that does not include some kind of building. Code is not found. It is only ever made. And it's only ever made by us. At the end of the day, releasing software is a moral act. Every time you release software, you are making a moral statement. You may not intend to. You may not think in those terms. You may not want to make a given statement, but you are by virtue of taking that action. If you release software under a proprietary license, you are saying, I reserve the right to use this code to control you against your will. You may not have any intention to do so. You may not want to do so. But that is, in fact, the statement you are making, because you are forbidding the user from changing the source code, changing the software to do what they want rather than what you want, in ways that could be mundane or could be life-changing. Or you could use a permissive license, MIT, BSD, and so on, which says, I will not use this code to control you, but you can use it to control someone else. You may not want them to. You may not intend for that to be the case, but that is in fact the statement you are making. How much permissively licensed code is out there in tools being used for cyber warfare, to spy on users, to manipulate user behavior? Probably quite a lot. This includes even on the web if you're using the GPL. Or you can say, you can use the GPL for desktop software or a GPL on the web, and say, I will not use this code to control you, and you may not use my work to control other people. You may not use my work as a tool to oppress others. Every time you release software, you are making one of these statements. These are your options. You may not like these options. You may not think about these options, but these are your options. Every software you release, every release you make, is making one of these statements. What statements will you make? Thank you. So slides are already up on Joined In. There are lots of links to further reading. I do recommend checking some of those out. I also highly recommend both of these books, Free Software, Free Society by Richard Stallman, and Free Culture by Lawrence Lessig. Both are available online for free in electronic form, or I think both of them are available in print form if you prefer, and that does have a cost to it, but they are available for free if you're so inclined. Questions?
Freedom to redistribute also means it takes away the freedom of the developer to earn money. How do you square this with ethical obligations towards the developer?
One, you have no right to profit.
I'm not saying profit, but my supermarket doesn't accept me saying, oh, you actually use some software, all right, can I just take my shopping with me?
There are dozens of business models that free software developers have used for years, all of which work quite well. I was a consultant for 10 years, and I made quite a good living doing it, using GPL software. Documentation, there are developers who make money that way. A lot of software is written by companies for their own use. The vast majority of the Linux kernel is written by full-time staff developers at Red Hat, IBM, SUSE, Google, who are paid by their employer to work on Linux. That's the business model. you can still sell software that is under a free software license for money. There is a lot of free software for sale on the Android App Store, or the Play Store, whatever they call theirs, that is under the GPL. The source code is up on GitHub, or you can pay $2 and download it through the App Store. 99.9% of people download it through the App Store and pay $2. Incidentally, you cannot do that on iPhone because their license for the App Store does not allow GPL software.
Yeah, and by the way, companies actually on the App Store with those applications getting that €2 or the $2, which are not the developers, because GPL allows for other people to sell your code without you profiting from it.
Yes. And
how ethical is that?
if you're releasing something under a free software license, you are explicitly saying, I give you permission to do so. And that still leaves ample opportunity for making profit, as has been shown. The idea that the only business model within software is selling individual units as though it were a widget or a physical object, that's simply not the case. To say that only that business model is viable, if that business model ends up being not compatible with the ethical requirement to not violate people's rights over their own lives, then that's not a business model. We said that right at the beginning.
How do you cut the line between secrecy and open? To make an example, take something controversial like the Manhattan Project. It made a bomb. It caused, I would say, an end to a war. It can be seen as it caused the end of a lot of lives. But secrecy is also the reason why it succeeded. Where do you cut the line there between openness and secrecy if I invent something that is highly poisonous that may save humanity, for example?
There is no requirement in free software that you distribute the code to anyone who wants it. The only requirement is that those who receive a copy of the runnable version also are entitled to a copy of the editable version and the right to modify it. So if you're a developer working on software at the Manhattan Project, you are under absolutely zero obligation to share that code with anyone outside of the Manhattan Project. That is totally okay. If you are working at a company and you are building some internal monitoring application that happens to use GPL components, you're under zero obligation to share that application, that monitoring application, with anyone else. The only requirement is that if you choose to do so, then those you share it with have the same rights. If you want to share it with them by saying, hey, I'm going to sell you a copy for $1,000, and they're willing to pay you $1,000 for a copy, more power to you, go for it. But they get it under the GPL and the right to modify it. So secrecy is fine, as long as those who own the computer have control over the computer.
Speaking of which, there is a good petition called publiccode.eu, which is basically explaining what you already do in the UK. I know some don't care anymore,
Okay.
but please sign it.
So for the recording, publiccode.eu,
Yeah.
good site to check out.
How do we get people to care about digital freedom?
Oh, that's the tricky one. I have been trying to figure that one out for years, because I've been having this debate for years. And part of the problem is that most people will look at convenience rather than long-term ethical rights. That is human nature. People don't think long-term. People think, ooh, shiny. That's why I argue it is our ethical responsibility as developers, who are a much smaller group and a group in a position to refuse to violate people's rights, to refuse to violate people's rights. We should not rely on people objecting to Amazon and Google and Microsoft and so on, collecting all of the data on us and doing nefarious things. The developers at those companies are in a position to say, we will simply not work on code that is going to violate our users. And if enough of us do that, we build a parallel ecosystem that respects users and grow from there. That is exactly what free software was trying to do for a long time before it got usurped by open source and by the web. I don't really know how to convince users to care until it matters. That's why we as developers need to care for them.
Do you not think money is the great motivator then? So if a developer says, on Amazon, I refuse to do this, but Amazon says, okay, we'll like triple your salary to do it, do you not think they will basically always prefer, well, I think a majority of people will prefer the bonus over the ethics?
Many would, and that's unfortunate. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that, and that's a much broader question than just software. You're now into very deep ethical territory that is probably a talk unto itself. I don't have an easy answer. I wish I did.
Well, I work with free software, and so it kind of demonstrates that you can make money from it. But to take your John Deere example, if I knew how to build tractors, and I want to say, the software in my tractor, I want people to be able to manipulate it, change it, reinstall it, do what they want to do with it. I'm probably not going to make as much money as John Deere are going to make. So I'm not going to be as successful, and John Deere are probably going to do what they can to squash that anyway. How would you suggest that people work with that reality?
So there's a couple of parts to that. Tractors are a hard problem because there's enormous capital cost, independent of any software. Quite frankly, that is a much bigger problem to entry than any software issue, even today, where software runs most things. That said, it's a lot easier for a number of small organizations to get together. Early on in my career, I was a consultant, and my company worked with a consortium of small theaters that really did not want to pay Ticketmaster's outrageous gouge fees. Is Ticketmaster in the US, in the UK as well? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about then. And so they, like 8 or 10 of them, got together and built their own ticketing software. They didn't actually release it open source. I don't know why. Mostly it's just stupidity. They never made money off of it. But that is an absolutely valid case for, hey, we make money not on software but on selling theater tickets. We're going to get together and collaborate on making a really great way for us to all sell tickets really effectively. And Ticketmaster can go away. That's an absolutely wonderful use case for free software and open source. And then who's paying the developer salaries? The theater who wants to not pay Ticketmaster, they pay the developer instead. And if there's 8 of them paying 3 developers, that's still saving them money. So
that works as long as it is technically superior, but for example, the John Deere have probably got a lot of trade secrets that do give them the edge.
Superior is not always just a technical question. The best technology doesn't always win, as we've seen many times. It has to be superior for the business, and in that case, it's free is a very compelling advantage. Even if it doesn't have quite as many features as Ticketmaster, it doesn't cost me anything. I still get the full ticket price or close to, and my money is still off the ticket price. Then that's still better than what Ticketmaster is offering me. The whole package is much better then. And that's, again, the open source argument that, hey, there is a business model here to do it that way. So that's, you have options like that. The OpenStack project was very much a collaboration between a number of different, very large organizations, large companies. To sign on as a member of the OpenStack consortium, everything that they were releasing was free software, but to sign on as a member of the steering committee, your company had to commit at least 8 full-time developers. Yes, that means only really big companies could do it, but really only really big companies were ever going to use that anyway. So, there are ways to collaborate that will get you something financially sustainable and still be free software.
I think taking the John Deere example, I do think that the vendor of the hardware has a duty of care to protect the people who could get run over by the tractor. And therefore, I'm not sure that I would want the software in that tractor open to everybody to tackle and inject things into, and who the hell would I sue afterwards?
That's a concern. But at the same time, if you're that farmer, maybe you're not a developer, but I want to be able to take my business elsewhere. I'm now locked into the John Deere monopoly. Is John Deere the only company that knows how to write software that doesn't crash? Probably not.
In that case, build an open source tractor. And as I say, I do think there's a very strong argument for keeping certain things in life absolutely like them and not free.
But then again, if you bought a tractor, a lot of money to pay out, and something goes wrong, surely you are almost necessarily on it.
I understand both sides of the argument,
Yeah.
but I do think that
But you don't want to be ripped off because
I mean, just imagine Tesla open sources everything, and suddenly the cars start, driving themselves and being
Toyota are,
fast.
aren't they? Toyota are going to do with self-driving.
See how far that goes with the future.
All right, hold on. Okay, I think last question.
I believe that, I don't know, I'm from Portugal, and in Portugal we have a law that if you are the only business doing that or selling this product, you have to have a competitor, else you need to go out of business because you will have a monopoly. So that's not the
That's a very aggressive monopoly law. I like it.
Why didn't the farmers bought another truck that didn't have those things? And besides, before we speak about Portugal, this prevented a lot of corruption that we had, for example, in games, monopolies, and all of that.
So the question is, why not take your business elsewhere to someone other than John Deere?
Exactly. Why didn't they bought another truck?
So, one, John Deere is far and away the largest manufacturer. I don't know if they're technically a monopoly or not, but they are definitely the largest. Two, a lot of people don't realize this is an issue until they've already paid $500,000 for a tractor. They can't afford to just take their business elsewhere very easily.
Going to buy a product that expensive, I would do a research. Isn't it better to really take people to do a proper buy instead of...
¿Por qué no le dos?
So I see that the problem is the people and how they do
It's,
how they buy stuff instead of
this relates to the question up here earlier. You have to educate people about what they're buying. At the same time, we have an ethical obligation to not sell them a lemon and not sell them something that is going to make them beholden to us. Both sides have a responsibility to behave ethically. And you're both doing your own research and not putting out bad products in the first place. That is our responsibility. Thank you. Over to you, Chris.